Welcome back to Good Distinctions. I'm your host, Will Wright, and joining me today is Teresa Yanaros. Teresa, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Will. Glad to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. Teresa is the author of a new book from Sophia Institute Press called Freedom from Darkness, A Roadmap to Deliverance from Spiritual Bondage and the Occult. But before we get into that, Teresa, if you would just briefly introduce yourself. I ask this of all my guests, but in your own words, who is Teresa Yanaros? What do you do? Who are you? Take as much time as you like. Who are
Yes,
you?
thank you. So my name is Teresa Yanaros. I am a degree journalist, and in my early career, I actually went into the New Age and into the occult. I wrote a book about it. My attempt was to try to reconcile Catholicism with the New Age. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work. But after getting really deeply into these false belief systems, I thought everything was going my way, getting a little bit of fame, getting picked up by TV shows, and then my world came crashing down around me as the Lord started to reveal the truth to me about what these practices really are and how evil they are and how they draw us away from Him. And so after my long and arduous journey of getting freed of these belief systems, after really getting deeply into the Word, going to seminary, and then launching a ministry, I now work with people coming out of the occult and the New Age. I've trained in Rome with exorcists, and I work with people to reform their worldview out of an occult worldview and into a Christian worldview. My whole shtick is deliverance is a process. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. There are a lot of things out there that people believe, lots of disinformation, misinformation about the concept of the occult and the New Age and how it impacts people. And so my job is to advocate for the people coming out of the New Age and the occult, and also to help to raise awareness around what these things really are and the implications of these practices.
Excellent. I think it was probably a year and a half ago now, I had my friend Rami on the show, and she was a New Age practitioner of all sorts of different things, living in Sedona, Arizona, which is like the Mecca of New Age, just 2 hours north of where I am here. And she had this phenomenal conversion experience where she came to Catholicism because she had a dream of our Lord saying, go to church, but she had absolutely no background in Catholicism. It was a really remarkable story. But that was not the case for you. What was your upbringing like? What was your childhood like?
So I was raised devout Catholic, very strong Catholic family. And there are a couple of aspects of my history that I think are important to describe as we're talking about getting into the occult and then out of it. And from my upbringing, there are two things that are important. Number one, my dad was in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot, and he was stationed at RAF Woodbridge during the time of the Rendlesham Forest incident, which happened in 1980. And for those of you who don't know, or perhaps you're not a ufologist, it's a mass UFO sighting. And it's world renowned, and it's basically UK's Roswell. So it was highly documented. There was a government cover up. And so I was raised in a family that was really into government conspiracy and UFOs. And so that was just a foundation for me. But then there's also another component. I lived in Virginia for a time, and our priest actually experienced the wounds of stigmata. And there were statues of Mary in the church that would cry at times. Hundreds of people witnessed this. It was in Time magazine. And so you have this kind of juxtaposition here where you have the strong faith upbringing, but then this interest or intrigue in government conspiracy and the paranormal. And so all of these things came in together that whenever I ended up going to college and going to get a degree in journalism, I had a high level of curiosity in researching all of these topics, which eventually led me into the occult.
You detail in the book that sort of the way that you entered into occult practices at first was actually through someone that was with you who incidentally was a scientist, and you're a journalist. So not to put too blunt a point, how did you get tricked?
Yeah.
What was the deceit?
It actually went further back than my ex-partner, who a PhD physicist, who got me deeper into conspiracy. But there's actually another component here that's important, I think. And this happens in a lot of people's stories. It was actually someone I really respected, which was to say my dad. So my dad being a strong man of faith, but then he was getting interested in the occult because he had divorced my mom and was dating a past life regressionist at the time. So he was starting to research reincarnation, and he was starting to learn about reincarnation. And so you can see this kind of concept of anyone really getting off the path. They can be Catholic, they can be Christian, and then start to get interested, right? And so because I really respected my father, he's like, oh, you got to read this book. There was a book on past life regression. And so I started to get interested in reincarnation and try to understand, like, where does this fit in with Catholicism? And so my ex-partner, being a scientist, he's like, well, I would just want to learn if this is going to work. And so he actually went on YouTube and watched one of those videos where you go into altered state of consciousness. And then he actually had a vision or an experience that he believed in. And when he came out of this experience, he said, well, I believe in past lives. I believe in reincarnation now. It was that quick because of, when you go into 2 Thessalonians 2, we talk about demonic signs and wonders. There are tricks that demons play on humanity. And I call it occult snapping. It's a phrase that I created to describe how people get tricked into these things, because you can have a display that can be really believable and shocking because you're interfacing with something that you can't explain. And so it destabilizes your worldview. So since this happened around me, I saw it in front of me, it started to draw me deeper as well. And I actually started to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences and then look up what these things were. And that's when I started to learn about astral projection and remote viewing and those sorts of things that just started to lead me deeper and deeper.
You make a point in the book, too, that, sometimes it's the things that work really get people and go, wow, this actually worked. I should do this more. But you make the important point that sometimes it doesn't work, but that doesn't mean that you haven't opened a door. So there's a lot of little practical pieces of wisdom in the book there. But when these things work, what's going on in your mind, in your heart that has to have an effect?
It's traumatizing. Like, looking back at my own story and the things that I've seen whenever I was playing with the demonic, I didn't know I was playing with the demonic at the time. But when you see, like, I can give an example. There was a time where I was learning about altered states of consciousness and channeling, and I had an experience where I had a demonic sign and wonder appear in front of my eyes physically, where I saw like light tracing on water, and it was tracing out a constellation. And so I'm seeing this with my physical eyes. Now, in the moment when that's happening, it freaks you out. Part of you actually thinks you're losing your mind. Like, over the time that I was in the occult, there were times where I'm like, am I crazy? Like, have I lost my mind here? Because you're looking at things that you're seeing with your physical eyes, and you're going like, so you're trying to wrap your head around it. And this is where the worldview comes in. I say everything about this comes down to worldview. When you're engaging in these practices and you're seeing these signs, you're seeing these things that seem to work, and you're attributing it to your witchcraft or your channeling or the practices you're doing, there's usually a gap in understanding that it's actually the demons playing with you. You think that you're causing these things to happen, but it's because you're open to it. You're evoking, you're invoking. And so you're making those pacts and agreements through the act. And you just mentioned this. It's not actually through the something working. It's through the sin, the occult sin of actually giving yourself over to being open to those powers of darkness to come in and fraternize with you.
Just by way of definition for those listening, what is a cult? What does that mean?
Occult or a cult?
Occult.
Occult.
Yeah.
So I talk about the occult like this. It is two systems interlaced. You have the light occult and the dark occult. Light occult, well, the word occult just means hidden, but I'm going to be talking about the belief system. So you've got the light occult, which is the shiny veneer surface, and then the dark occult, which is the dark occulted hidden reality, which is to say the truth that these practices, these beliefs are actually drawing you into darkness. But the base level of what the occult is it's basically you're engaging in invocation or evocation of demonic spirits, whether unknowing or knowing of it, and you're engaging in witchcraft. So there's a base level of seeking power, knowledge, information, comfort, those things, through opening yourself up to being open to the demonic coming in through that active invocation or evocation. And there's usually ritualistic practice involved as well. So some form of action taken while you're doing this.
Okay. How does that relate to what people call the New Age movement? Like, what's the overlap? How big is the overlap?
It is, I mean, there's so much overlap. That's why I always say the New Age and the occult. The New Age is, the way that I like to describe the New Age is it's like a narcissistic approach to practical living. I think that's kind of a good blanket statement on it, because it's self-centric, self-serving, and you're engaging in a smattering of beliefs from a lot of different places that are getting you so focused on yourself. It's like when you put the New Age up next to Christianity, in the New Age, everything you're doing, the way that you're living, you're essentially doing it for yourself. And so the way I describe this is you have physical and mental practices that you're conflating with spiritual growth. That's the enormous difference between the New Age and Christianity, because you think that when you're doing some physical practice or mental practice, that it's progressing you spiritually. So I call this false sanctification, because you're actually not entering into true sanctification, which is only through the blood of Christ that we receive the Holy Spirit and we can actually be sanctified. It's the earth's way. It's a lie of Satan to trick people into thinking that what they're doing, thinking, feeling is actually going to cause some form of spiritual growth outside of Jesus Christ.
I make the point theologically that, something like Buddhism, or the general principle in Buddhism of clearing one's mind, emptying yourself to achieve some sort of higher consciousness or higher state, maybe an oversimplification, but that idea is diametrically opposed to Christianity, in that in Christianity, like you said, you're focusing on Christ, but you're emptying yourself to fill yourself with Christ. That it's entirely not about you. So I love the way that you characterize New Age as, very, very me focused, which can be very intoxicating, I can imagine.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think something to point out in what you're saying, though, on this thread, because it's important, is that a lot of people that get involved in the New Age and the occult, a lot of them have some form of trauma that they're trying to deal with. And so even just taking your example of like clearing the mind, like there are, ways that humans, like you want to just like calm yourself down. You want to clear your head, right? I'm not even saying like in a New Age way, just someone wanting to like take a break. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they have anxiety and they just want to like, I don't know, breathe for a second and clear their mind and not think about anything. There's nothing wrong with that. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And so I think that people get drawn in to think something that, well, that doesn't sound like a big deal. Okay, well, it's not. But when you start to get into the spiritual practice side, or what's perceived to be a spiritual practice side, when you go into the New Age and the occult side of that, what you're essentially doing is at that point, you can move very easily into invocation, meaning to call something in. So when you're going into a meditative state and you're calm and you're more receptive because of the brainwave state that you're in, and then you're calling in some whatever kind of energy, that's where you get into trouble. You can start to conflate things you're experiencing with the spiritual, even though it's just you in your own head, or you can actually be inviting the demonic in, and now you've got a pact going on. So I just wanted to make that point because I think it's important you brought that up. Point. And a lot of people talk about meditation. It's a very hot button topic across the board, Christian and non-Christian circles alike. So I think it's important to kind of get in the weeds on the distinctions there.
No, I love it. And one, good distinctions, that's what we're all about. Good distinctions is the spice of life. So it's a fascinating thing because, when we are meditating, when we're contemplating even the things of God, when we're in maybe a chapel and looking at the crucifix, a thought might come to our head, maybe even after some deep breathing, where we're trying to focus on the cross, and then this thought comes in our head, and I think, oh, was that me, or was that God, or what's going on? And so it is confusing at times. And I had a guest on not too long ago, and she had a very practical way of putting it. It's like, God's not trying to trick you. If he wants you to follow this thing that you received in the chapel while praying, looking at a crucifix, it's okay to just assume it's from God. Like, as long as it's not clearly, objectively evil or opposed to some truth of the faith, take a breath and move on. What we're talking about, though, is on the other side of things, is we're dealing with these things that aren't wrong in and of themselves, but can very easily be manipulated outside of a Christian context, outside of a context that has those, what I call them, guardrails of the faith. So I mean, not to get too deep into the weeds on this, but I mean, the idea that a lot of people like to bring up is something like yoga, for example, right? Where you're, especially like Kundalini yoga, I can't pronounce it properly, but like when you're making specific movements and using specific hand mudras, these are ancient, many of them are ancient sort of ways of holding your body or your hands that are sort of evocative of Hindu worship of false gods. So now we're getting into territory where it's like, is this just stretching or is this something else? So I'd love to get your take on that. Like, where is the line, so to speak, with these sorts of things?
I think it's really important for Christians, and this is, of course, a really large topic, and yoga is probably the most controversial to talk about in Christianity because it's so widely popular. But I think, like, at a core, too, in America, because I can just speak for America, sometimes people aren't actually doing yoga, what they're calling yoga. And so I think that it's important to get in the weeds on, like, what actually yoga is, and because, people will kind of freak out. Like, well, I'm going to a yoga class. Okay. And then tell me about the yoga class. And they tell me about the yoga class. And it's like, that doesn't actually sound like you're doing yoga. It sounds like they're calling it yoga. But you know what I'm saying? And so,
as
like,
a marketing ploy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so with any of this, and this is with my background in journalism, you want to look at this case by case basis to make sure that you're, like, getting in the weeds on, like, with the person, where they're at, what actually they're doing. Because it's so easy to make blanket statements and then you get into trouble on that because, people are having different experiences. And I don't want to I don't want to die on a hill that I don't want to die on, But I think the core here with Christians is that we need to really set a firm Christian example. And so if you're a Christian and you're going to a yoga class, and let's say it's not even yoga, do you really want to be aligned with it? You want people to see that? If you got a niece who's, like, getting involved in the occult, she sees you going to a yoga class. Now she's like, well, this is okay. And we're talking about worldview here, right? And so when we talk about the blend, we talk about Christians starting to slowly but surely get involved in occult practices, which is what happened to me. And it happens to a lot of people. You have to really check yourself, and you need to get in the weeds and do your research and study. What is this that I'm doing? Okay. Yoga is one example. Another example is the Enneagram. A lot of people, when I went to seminary, there were a lot of people into the Enneagram, and I'm sitting there and I'm listening. I had never heard of it before. And I'm like, this sounds a whole lot like tarot cards because the mechanism's the same. And when you get into these things and you study the history of them, it's going to equip you with more understanding of, like, who created this? How did they create it? Because the Enneagram was created by an occultist who claimed to channel it from spirit. And so it's really important that we get down into the weeds on the history, but also the practical side of what these things are and what they do. And that's the reason why I have my ministry, is because I try to boil these things down. We can throw words at it like yoga, tarot, Enneagram, any of that stuff. But I always like to kind of bring it down to a base level so people can be equipped with whatever the new thing is that's going to come out. And they're like, well, is this occult? Let's talk about it. Invocation, which is to call in, evocation, which is to call forth. From what I understand of yoga, there's a whole heck of a lot of invocation going on. I've seen people demonically possessed through doing yoga because they're calling in, they're invoking, right? And they're doing a physical act to attempt to invoke or evoke, right? Outside of the realm of God. A lot of people use the words like the Holy Spirit, but it's not actually what it is. One of the women that tells her testimony in my book was possessed through yoga. And she was Christian at the time. And she thought that there was this, like, because she had this thing that worked, quote unquote. She feels this indwelling of what she thought was the Holy Spirit. It was a counterfeit. And she had this attachment for years. And it wasn't until she came back to the faith and really leaned into her faith and cut all of that off and got reformed in her worldview that attachment went away. You see, so these practices are not benign, and you can go online, you can see so many different testimonies, right? So people just need to be careful, and they need to equip themselves so that they can be empowered to make the proper decisions and have discernment and be able to offer up their own distinction of what it is they should actually be engaging in.
I absolutely love that approach. It is something that, I mean, the reason I started this podcast was to make exactly the type of distinctions that you are, because it's so important. Because even if somebody was to leave bondage in the occult or anything else that they might be tied to, and I want to drill in a little bit more to what you mean by worldview, because I think it'll be important for those listening, is, even if you have a Christian worldview, if you adopt that, okay, yes, Jesus is Lord, I'm going to focus on him, but you get it in your head that there's all these different things that have to be just so, then if any of those things that are not fundamental to the faith, that they're not principles, but there may be private revelations, or they might be one particular theological opinion that you're conflating as being a matter of doctrine, and then somebody sort of just chips it a little bit, your whole world comes crashing apart. And I've seen this so often, especially with friends of mine who were, for lack of better terms, we'll call them radical traditionalists. But I've also seen it with a couple of my more progressive friends as well. And so there's this danger of sort of attaching, or I guess building our own worldview on things that are sand rather than a firm foundation. So what do you mean by worldview? How does someone adopt a Christian worldview? And what does that mean in the way that you're using it?
That's a lot of questions there. Okay, so let's talk about worldview. We'll base level talk about worldview.
Yeah.
Worldview is the lens through which you perceive reality. So think about worldview as like a pair of glasses that you're putting on. And I talk about the throne of the heart. What you put on the throne of your heart shows you what you value. What comes out of values are beliefs. What comes out of beliefs are thoughts, attitudes. What comes out of that, behaviors. What comes out of that, actions. What comes out of that, habits, even addictions. And so you can see that from the heart and what we hold on that throne, how all these things come outwards from that. And so when we talk about the occult on the throne of the heart, we talk about really what would that be? The self on the throne of the heart, right? So what do you value? Yourself. It's self-centered. What comes out of that? Thoughts about the self, beliefs, all narcissistic. What comes out of that? You're going to behave, you're going to act in a narcissistic way, and so on and so forth, right? So when it comes to someone coming out of the occult, you can see this happen where they'll go, well, I just stopped doing the tarot cards. I just stopped doing the witchcraft. But then they're walking forward with still a fully formed occult worldview. They have not really gotten clear on, well, what is the difference? We're talking about distinctions. What's the difference between where I'm at right now and what I hold dear and Christianity? And there's a gap, and it takes time to actually get really clear on that. So, you were talking about different worldviews, even within Christianity, right? And so it can be quite the mess when you're working with people coming out of the occult, where it's like they dip their toe in Christian land and they're like, why? Because they're already destabilized, they're already sore, they're already hurting, they're already freaked out, and they don't know what's going on. They know that Jesus, you talked about, I forget her name, the woman you had on your show.
Yeah, Rami.
Yeah, Rami, how she had this dream and then this radical shift, right? So now she's going like, it's like the whole rest of her has to catch up with where Jesus has taken her, right? Jesus is like, delivered you from the dominion of darkness, transferred you into the kingdom of, Jesus through God, right? That's the Colossians 1 moment. But then her whole worldview has to catch up, right? So in that gap, what has to happen is you have to take it deeper. Okay, I cut off this practice, but like, why was I doing that practice? Why was I behaving that way? What are my thoughts that led me to that were perhaps not actually orthodox? What is Christianity, right? So you pull out the Nicene Creed. Let's get in the weeds on the Nicene Creed. That's step one. If I'm working with people coming out of the occult, you pull out the Nicene Creed, and I have them actually go line by line and look at, what does this line in the Nicene Creed, how does that go against what you used to believe? Or how did the New Age say that was wrong? And when they go through that, then it's a base level of understanding what actually is the difference between the occult and what Christians believe. And so they can start to ask themselves, where do I fall on this? And then you get them into scripture. Then you get them into understanding the sacraments. So there's a whole, and it takes time, but what you start to see in people is that there is a humility has to be step one. So people got to humble themselves and realize like, okay, maybe I don't have this whole thing figured out. Number two, they have to surrender. And that happens in shades over time.
What is the for those who are coming out of this, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of like you say, that gap that has to be the worldview that has to be configured. And where did the sacraments come in? Because I'm thinking about this as someone who worked in a parish for 7 years helping people through RCIA, and I know how the normal sort of flow of initiation goes and what that looks like. I mean, my guess, and I'll have you answer it, and you can sort of share your experience with this, but my guess is that the period of purification and enlightenment might be a little bit longer than just Lent. Right? There might be like some time that needs to happen. And like you say, obviously starting with the catechumenate and going through the creed, maybe that takes a bit longer too. Is it just a matter of longer, or what does that normally look like? And I know everybody's different. Every case is different.
Every case is so different. It is really kind of wild walking with people from all over the world going through this journey, because it looks drastically different case over case. And it's like, depending on which faith they're in, because, I've worked with Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, like across the board, right? And so you're sort of like having to try to walk with what the resources are around them. I had a woman in Germany, and it was really difficult to get her even in contact with a priest because it's hard out there. So it's like everything is going to look different. So depending on the case, right? However, I want to speak to what you were saying about the sacrament, because here's the thing. Confession is epic. It is like the best for this, getting out of the occult. Because when you're reforming your worldview, you're walking with Jesus, the Holy Spirit's raising things up, shade after shade, for you to shuck off, to leave at the foot of the cross. Like when you get in the habit of going to confession, I've seen it worked really well for me, works really well for me. It works really well for, I've seen a lot of people experience, like, it's just so much grace through it. And I think it also trains a person. So I get really excited about the sacraments. It trains a person to learn grace, to learn how to surrender and receive. And this is why the sacraments, in my opinion, are single-handedly the most effective tool that God gave us to get free of the occult, because you're actually stepping into that fullness of, I believe and I receive and I surrender to you, Lord. And in that, I have watched miraculous healings. I've watched a person get freed of the demonic after going through confession for her first time. And the priest laid hands, absolved her, she passed out. The only reason why I was present was because it was in a deliverance ministry atmosphere, and it was an exorcist, and she was possessed. But she passed out and came up. What happened? It was the grace that she had received. I mean, I don't know exactly what happened. I'll never know on this side of the veil. Maybe I'll never know. But I think what happened was, it was a demonic trick. The demons were mad. The demons were mad because she was going through that process of going, yes, Lord Jesus, take this sin away from me. I trust you. Jesus, I trust in you. Like, beautiful. And then also, obviously receiving the sacrament, the Blessed Sacrament. Huge, because a lot of these people, when you're dealing with demonic possession, this is really heartbreaking, so trigger warning, but like when people are possessed, it can be hard for them to even go physically into a church. Sometimes they're actually not able to physically enter the church. Sometimes they experience really traumatic things that I'm not going to say out loud before the sacrament internally, or they start manifesting. And so it's when you hear the stories of people just simply desiring the sacrament and the journey that they walk with the Lord to either, get through RCIA, OCIA to get there, it's tremendously difficult, and the demons really are trying to prevent that person from getting there. And so you hear these incredible stories of people persevering to even receive the host the first time. I mean, I have wept over some of these stories and just praised and thanked the Lord, because when they are able to finally receive the sacrament, I mean, these people are so on fire for Christ, and they will cry just to be able to go to church and receive the Eucharist because of what they've been through and what they've seen and experienced, and just the drastic difference in that full surrender and that grace received.
And I can't even wrap my mind around it. It's beautiful to hear that witness, because I mean, I haven't seen someone be free to the occult, but I've seen people wait years to receive communion, maybe because of a annulment issue or whatever the case might be. But just seeing that desire of people is something I think all of us should rekindle in our own lives and ask for the grace of the Holy Spirit to inflame in us. Because I go to confession at least once every couple of weeks, and I need that. I can't imagine life without it. I really can't. Nor the Blessed Sacrament. It's a tremendous gift that we have, and we all need healing. It's not like we have to go through these dramatic things or be wrapped up in the occult in an explicit way. Like, we all need healing from something. I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Rick Warren from the Saddleback Church. He said there's two types of people in the world: those in recovery and those who need to be in recovery, or something like that, when talking about his 12-step program. And I was like, that's really true.
We're all on this side of the veil.
Right. Like, we're in this valley of tears. We all need healing. We all need help. The other question I wanted to ask with the occult and with New Age practices is, you draw this out in the book that there's not no one's sort of immune from it today. We live in this post-Christian milieu where there's been a lot of syncretism outright, where you have this blend of Catholicism with other false religions. But now, in this sort of neo-pagan world that we find ourselves, it seems like there's you call it a blending of occult practices that we wouldn't even think of. I mean, what are some examples of that people might
I'm pulling up
pick
some
up on?
statistics right now. This stuff is crazy. So this is from Pew Research. 62% of Americans believe that they have spiritual energy within themselves, reflecting a rising trend of self-deification associated with the New Age. Here's one. 36% of Catholics say it's acceptable to practice multiple religions simultaneously.
Right.
25% of U.S. adults, including some Catholics, believe in astrology. 55% of U.S. adults, including some Catholics, believe in some form of moral relativism. And so even when you just look at the statistics these days, which I've spent quite a lot of hours just pouring through, trying to wrap my head around what we're dealing with here, Christianity is in a percentage decline, and the spiritual but not religious stuff is getting more popular. Like, this concept of the blend is becoming way more and it's syncretism. I just call it the blend because I think it makes more sense, and I try to bring it down to earth.
Sure.
But it's like, it's Christians thinking that these things are okay to do, and they start folding in the New Age, and it's everywhere around you. Go into any store, do an experiment. Go into any store and see if you can find a New Age product. I do this with people sometimes where they're like, Teresa, is it really like this big of a deal? Like, oh, like, okay, well, let's go into this store. And we walk into the store, and I'm like, and then when they start to understand, oh, wow. And once their eyes are open to it, now they're going, oh, there's this and that, because it's so much around us that we're desensitized. We don't even see it. I went to Ross the other day, and there's a whole section in there just by the paints that have tarot cards, how to create the tarot cards for kids. You go into a half-price bookstore, you see section on like teaching kids how to create their own tarot cards and stuff like that. I mean, it's for kids, but this is much bigger of an issue. I know another thing, I'm going to go on a rant for a second. Some people say, oh yeah, like the New Age, the occult, it gets the young ones. That's not only the case though, because I hear and see evidence of like a lot of adults getting wrapped up to this, and people want to just throw their hands up like, oh, that would never happen to me. I don't believe in anything like that. But then when you talk to them and they start to understand and they start to define and understand the definitions, they're like, oh, actually, yeah, I did kind of believe in law of attraction. I thought that I could manifest my reality. Oh, well, I do check my horoscopes every day, but it's not that big of a deal. Like, yeah, I went to a psychic last year. I mean, and then the can of worms opens and you're like, what? And so unfortunately, yeah, it's more and more prevalent. And I think people also want to deny, and if they've got demonic pacts, the demons want to stay hidden. So people want to be in denial because they don't want to confront the idea that they're doing something spiritually dangerous. And what I say to that is, again, I will appeal to the Christian responsibility and say, what kind of example do you want to be offering to the people around you? Maybe that's enough to get you looking at your own beliefs and practices. But if not, like, read the book. That's what I think. That's kind of what the idea around the ministry is, really, with just trying to raise awareness of, like, these things are very obfuscated. The concepts are very obfuscated.
I just have one more question.
Yeah.
'Cause I know this is a little bit longer than I had planned, but it's a great conversation. I really appreciate it. When we're looking at, I don't want anyone listening to be like, well, now that I know this, I need to go and find all the people in my life that are into the occult and tell them that why they're wrong. I would definitely recommend everyone listening look at your own life first. You know, as the gospel says, pull the plank out of your eye before you get the splinter in your brother's eye. However, that being said, that caveat aside, there are a lot of people who are overtly into the occult and don't see any issue with it. How do you recommend people who are believing Christians, Catholics, intervening in a way that's more direct than just praying for them? Praying for them is a given, but should they be having those conversations, and what would that look like?
This, again, is going to be one of those answers where it's going to depend on the case. It's a case-by-case basis. And I do have people that approach me and say, like, hey, Teresa, I have this, sister who's getting involved in the occult, and I really want to confront her. Like, what can I say? And it's, if a person is so deep in the occult, they see a Christian as unenlightened. So there's nothing really that a Christian, no matter how close you are, that you're going to say to them that they're going to go, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, why didn't I think of that before? Because they're already functioning in a worldview that states, like, Christianity is so lo-fi and unenlightened that, like, you just don't know the real true reality yet. And so what I say for, obviously prayer, like you said, but I think there's also, like, depending on the situation, you want to make sure that you're not actively getting involved in relationships with, if you're a Christian, you need to be really careful with boundaries, because if someone's involved in the new age of the occult, like, it's like, how, like, are you going to backslide? You should be really careful. If it's someone, like, let's say, I'll give an example, like a sister, someone that's, like, in your immediate family, what you want to do is have boundaries. Make sure you're not, like, actively condoning the practices ever, anything like that. You want to make sure you have firm boundaries. But what you don't want to do is come across as judgmental. The reason why is because if this person has something that occurs to destabilize their worldview, if they see you as a safe person and you're loving them and you're caring to them, they could actually come to you with their questions. So what you want to do is you actually want to equip yourself with the knowledge of how to respond to them or how to bring it up, and then pray for an opening. That's what I say, because you never know. There could be some perfect opportunity that comes up in conversation where you're like, oh, well, I just watched a video the other day and they said this. I thought it was kind of interesting. And then you start talking about something else. So there are ways that you can plant seeds, but you can also prepare for, if they do hit you with, like, I want to have a really deep conversation, you need to be able to engage in that level. So you have to raise your own awareness so that you're able to, when that time is right, if the time comes, then you can have that conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Well, Teresa, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those listening, please go to Sophia Press and buy Freedom from Darkness, a roadmap to deliverance from spiritual bondage and the occult. This is a great book. In general, it's a great book, but it's a great book to buy, I think, for really anyone who's a believing Christian who just wants to be more aware of what people are going through in our world today, because this is not a small issue. This is, as we've been talking about, this is a lot of people who might be right on the edge of being pulled out of it. And like you said so beautifully, we need to be ready to receive them with charity and with grace and with love and as much understanding as we can. And I think this book helps with that, helps us grow in the understanding of sort of what is ensnaring people, and the way that you put it so well in your ministry, but also in the book, of this roadmap of how do we get out? How do people that are stuck in this get out? So, Teresa, any final thoughts or anything you'd like to push push people towards, invite people towards.
Yeah. If you're looking for any sort of free resources, if you go to spiritsanctified.com, that is my website where you can read articles and testimonies from other people that have also come out of the occult and the New Age. My intention with that is to equip people with articles and videos to help them if they're really trying to understand some of these topics or if they're looking for media to share with others. So thank you so much, Will, for having me. This was a great conversation, and I appreciate you reading the book.
Thanks so much. For those listening, please go to gooddistinctions.com and subscribe for free. I will be taking a bit of a hiatus as I finish my doctorate, but I will be back at some point. It could be in a year or 5 years. Who knows? God knows. And in the meantime, I'll be posting other things, written things, and things that I think are worth sharing. Teresa, thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you next time.